Welcome back to our Hemispheric Security Conference. And we're going to continue with the theme of economic security as national security. And this time we have 5 panelists and 1 moderator to really talk about all the ways in which we have the role of the private sector in addressing security issues in Latin America and the Caribbean. So I'd like to invite our 5 panelists and moderator. The moderator this time around is Janina Kogan, director of the Taeda Foundation. So please give us a round of applause for this panel.
Hi, everyone, and thank you for sharing with us this panel about economic security. This panel, we are going to explore how private sector entities perceive and tackle diverse security challenges and delve into strategies for enhanced collaboration with US and regional governments to fortify economic security as a cornerstone of national security. My name is Janina Kogan. I'm the director of Taeda Foundation. It's a pleasure for me to be here. So thank you all, and thank you all the panelists that are sharing with us. The first one I will introduce is Nicholas Schumann. Nicholas is HSBC US Head of Financial Crime Framework, where he oversees HSBC involvement in financial information sharing partnership in the US. He's also a US Army Reserve officer with multiple deployments overseas. Before joining HSBC in 2015, Nick spent nearly 7 years with the US Department of Treasury's Office of Terrorism and Financial Intelligence, where he supported the development of targeted financial measures against national security threats with a focus on Latin America and the Caribbean. Thank you, Nick, for being with us. And my first question will be, financial crimes, such as money laundering and terrorist financing, are global challenges that impact both the private and the public sectors, including here in the Western Hemisphere. Can you tell us a little bit about what are you seeing as a developing response or solution to these challenges?
Absolutely. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for the question, Janina. Thanks for FIU for putting this great conference together and for the opportunity to discuss this really important and timely and relevant topic. And so first, I want to quickly set the context for my later remarks, which are really going to center on a solution to the threat of financial crime, which has clear economic and national security implications. I know we're going to talk a lot about threats all day today, so I'm going to talk a little bit about threats and then hopefully spend more time again on solutions. So earlier this year, NASDAQ published a report that assessed that in 2003, more than 3 trillion with a T in illicit funds flowed through the global financial system. The US Treasury Department, meanwhile, released its national risk assessment on money laundering just a couple months ago and noted that money laundering does several things, including enabling criminal activity, distorting legitimate economic markets. It has a devastating economic and social impact on citizens, and it ultimately threatens national security in all the various jurisdictions in which it has an impact. So with that said, again, just to set the stage very quickly on the threat, what I really want to discuss here is an important trend that began over the course of the past decade, and that was towards developing new and innovative types of public-private partnerships, or PPPs to introduce the acronym, really to combat a wide range of different national security and public safety threats. And this includes PPPs that are focused on illicit financial activity and the underlying range of predicate crimes. So any type of crime out there is just it's gonna have an illicit financial component, including those that are causing harm to the environment, such as the illegal wildlife trade and the illicit timber trade. So a couple forms of environmental crime that I know are gonna be discussed throughout this conference. So I really want to focus my remarks on a specific type of PPP, which is called the Financial Information Sharing Partnership, or FISP, to introduce yet another acronym. And FISPs, they focus on improving cooperation and enhancing information sharing between public and private sector entities, as well as enhancing private to private information sharing across the financial sector. I think we're going to talk a little bit more about this amongst the panel. And I think many of you might have picked up that during the fireside chat this morning, there was a couple terms that caught my attention at least. Dr. General Richardson mentioned money laundering, talked about private sector engagement, and talked about information sharing. And these are all elements that are critical components of these FISPs. So thankfully, there's been some really excellent and publicly available research that's been done over the course of the past few years by the Future of Financial Intelligence Sharing Program, or FFIS. It's been done in partnership with the Royal United Services Institute, or RUSI, and this research is specifically focused on the formation of these types of partnerships. The research is incredibly enlightening, and I would really encourage interested folks to read. It's not terribly too long. So these partnerships, talking a little bit more about what they are, what they do, they take various forms, each with its own nuances, and each model aligned to the legal framework and unique circumstances and threats that the respective stakeholders are facing in their given country. So in terms of membership, these FISPs can include law enforcement agencies. They can include national level financial intelligence units, or FIUs. Most countries have them. They can include financial institutions such as banks, which obviously operate in every country, members of civil society. So these could include, really great nonprofits doing data-driven analysis. And they can include technology companies, for example. So it's incredibly important to harness data. And you can imagine the power that comes together when you're getting financial institutions to share information with one another and with government agencies much more effectively. And these partnerships can offer really a wide range of capabilities and outputs, from the development of strategic level insights, such as trend and typological information. They can offer collaborative automated monitoring of financial transactions. And they can also include joint analytic and investigative work centered on specific cases and transnational criminal networks. And so often a key outcome or deliverable for these types of partnerships is to provide highly useful information to government authorities in priority areas. And this is one of the 3 Wolfsburg Group principles on effectiveness. And the Wolfsburg Group, by the way, is an association of 12 global banks, which develops guidance for the management of financial crime risk, and which was founded about 25 years ago. So the last thing I'll say is, some of the key achievements to date from these partnerships has been to improve efforts to detect and combat financial crime. And so ultimately, by working together and breaking down silos, banks and government agencies involved in these partnerships can do a much better job fighting financial crime by enhancing information sharing, by identifying new trends, new typologies, new criminal networks, and doing so much more quickly and then much more effectively.
Thank you, Nick. We are going to be with you in a minute again. Thank you, Mariah, to have you here and to share with us this panel. Maria Lourdes Teran is Vice President of American Society, the Council of the American, and is the head of the Miami office. With over 25 years of experience working with Latin America, she leads business-relevant public policy programs and initiatives engaging public and private sector leaders, NGOs, foundations, and academics on a range of business and policy issues, as well as C-level leadership forums for CEOs and CFOs of major multilatinas and multinational companies across the Western Hemisphere. Teran leads corporate membership, strategic partnership, and alliances in Miami, in addition to building the Bravo Leadership Forum series at the annual symposium of Bravo Business Awards. Well, Maria, thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you.
And the first question for you will be, as a Council of the Americas, your organization focuses on open dialogue and collaboration between public and private sectors in Latin America. What would you say are the key strategies that your private sector members are implementing when it comes to better public-private sector collaboration for addressing security challenges in the region?
Bueno, Janina, thank you, and great to be up here with our fellow panelists. And thank you to FIU. I mean, putting together, I think it's the 9th year of this conference. I think, what we see is not so much a conference, but really building a community to collaborate around such an important topic. So really, looking at kind of public-private, I think it's a little bit what you're talking about. You've seen really the innovation based on the need over the last 15 years. For us, for example, one topic that it's, of course, top of mind for so many of our private sector members is cyber, right? Cybersecurity. And what we've seen that's been really innovative is really seeing cyber companies, tech companies, digital companies are collaborating like they've never collaborated before. Even highly competitive industries and highly competitive companies really coming together really for information sharing, education, and collaboration. So really we're seeing these companies come together, especially now, to form task forces and alliances to really focus on educating and really giving information to governments in Latin America. And there you're seeing really great public-private collaboration. In that sense, really looking at educating governments at the national, at the state and the city level, not only information and obviously protection measures, et cetera, but also they're bringing in case studies, a lot of case studies from overseas, or even issues that are happening. So again, really seeing that amazing collaboration between even private sector companies that compete, and also sharing cost-benefit analysis, everything around cyber, because unfortunately, one of the things that we hear over and over again, and we've seen is, first of all, with the changes in government over the last 10 years in Latin America, but also, most importantly, in Latin America, you see kind of this triple threat when it comes to cyber. One is, unfortunately, it is a region that lags behind in adaptation of cyber policies and even just really understanding the threat. So we see these private sector companies coming in and really, again, educating governments by showcasing what other regions in the world have done. The second thing is also the cyber risk and how it's expanded, right? I think 10 years ago, we would talk more about financial services. It was all about cyber and banking. But today, we all know that cyber risk is expanded throughout the countries, right? You see it with the digitalization of ports, of infrastructure, of energy, of a city transportation. Now these local governments are dealing with mega cyber risk across the entire economy. So that's, I think, a second one, which is a very different threat level than we had before. And I think the last one is AI, right? Everybody's talking about AI. It's not coming, it's here. And again, what we're hearing with some of the cyber experts and the tech companies is with AI, the cyber risks are going to come faster and bigger. So I think because of all those challenges that we have in our region, seeing this just kind of unusual private to private sector collaboration to really work with governments. And last thing I'd like to say is, just we're seeing, unfortunately, locally at the government level, cyber is really just not a top priority as much as it should be. So,
thank you, Maria. Well, I will speak in Spanish. Hola, Oscar Rocha, un gusto enorme de tenerte con nosotros en este panel y voy a presentar a Oscar Rocha. Él es director de Estudios Sociales de FEMSA, nació en Ciudad de México, tiene una licenciatura en Administración Pública en el Colegio de México, trabajó en áreas de comunicación social en la Secretaría de Programación y Presupuesto y en Presidencia de la República. Sirvió como ministro para Asuntos Especiales en la Embajada de México en Washington, fue asesor del secretario de Hacienda y Crédito Público en materia de seguridad nacional, tiene un diplomado en seguridad nacional, ingresó al Centro de Investigación y Seguridad Nacional para después formar parte de la Policía Federal y de la Procuraduría General de la República, donde estableció y dirigió el Centro de Intervención de Comunicaciones de la CIEDO. Dejó el servicio público y asumió la Dirección de Protección de Activos de Walmart de México. Desde finales de 2014 es el director de Estudios Sociales de FEMSA, responsable de la seguridad del grupo en su conjunto. Actualmente preside la Comisión de Seguridad y Justicia del Consejo Nuevo León. Asimismo, participa activamente en diversas iniciativas del Consejo Cívico y de la Mesa Metrópoli de Monterrey. Bueno, Oscar, luego de esta presentación, ¿qué nos puedes comentar sobre los desafíos de seguridad que vives en tu puesto y sobre los próximos desafíos de seguridad que ves y el sector privado?
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for the invitation to this conference. I think for a large public company as ours and operating in 12 Latin American countries, it becomes sort of like as a mosaic of risks and things that are opportunities to work along, as in the public-private partnerships that both of you were mentioning, to work along our governments at all levels. And I would say that the main thing that I would like to stress is the engagement that has to come out from the private sector to talk to different types of authorities, understand what they're going through. They're usually under-resourced, underappreciated, and lacking in the networking and the dialogue that fosters a sense of community for people who address security issues. So in that context, I think private industry has a very important role. And there might be examples of things done at the very general level as a general dialogue. And the couple of organizations you mentioned that I'm involved with are an example of it. But there are other very, I would say, sort of like a hardcore activities, like setting up anti-kidnapping units on the Attorney General's office infrastructure that obviously serve anybody, any citizen. In the case of Nuevo León, the state of in Mexico, where our company is based, and setting up along with the public authorities sort of like very specialized capabilities. Right now, we're toying with the idea precisely of cyber, because we find that companies are a little bit out of their own, trying to become safe in the cyber arena, but that there isn't a equivalent, let's say, effort being done from the rule of law side, and that we all need to become conscious of such a need, and to get involved and work on it. So the first thing that I would suggest is companies need to be to understand their responsibility in this sort of like ecosystem, and to be able also to share and transport their best practices from one country to another when they have operations. That's also an incredible opportunity. And in general, just being very engaged with what is going on with a very changing security threat environment. Thank you.
Thank you, Oscar. Now I'm going to introduce Mr. Fraser. He's the CEO of Lourdes, a leading commercial provider of space domain awareness and space situational awareness. He also serves on the board of Iridium Communications, a pioneer in the commercial satellite communications and Aurea space, a mid-tier government contractor. Prior to Lourdes, Mr. Fraser served as an executive vice president and general manager of public sector Earth intelligence at Maxar Technologies, where he led a 1 billion satellite imagery and geospatial analytics business with over 1,200 team members. Prior to Maxar, Mr. Fraser led teams at Cisco, Infor, IBM, and several early-stage technology companies. After beginning his career at Bain & Company, Mr. Fraser earned a Bachelor of Systems Engineering from the University of Pennsylvania and an MBA with distinction from Harvard University. So the question would be, what's your perspective on the level of private investment in space and the imperative to ensure the security of these assets?
Thank you, Nina, and thanks all for organizing a wonderful event. I think that as I was thinking about this conference and the theme of public-private partnership, I think the space industry is a good case study for that, because as many know, 60, 70 years ago, space was completely underwritten through government investment. Last year in 2023, there was about $117 billion of investment by government agencies around the world. And that's to support a variety of missions from civil to national security. I think what's been really interesting to see is that through changes in regulation, as well as encouraging private investment, that there's been a tremendous investment by private equity and other forms of risk capital into the space industry. Over the past 10 years, there's been $305 billion invested by private equity firms, venture capital, in the public markets, to grow the space industry. And that's enabling a variety of use cases, from enabling assured communications to remote sensing, and then that's allowing, for many applications, across a variety of markets. Things that are relevant to the Western Hemisphere include mapping applications, so location-based services. There's a lot of applications of humanitarian assistance, disaster response, environmental and climate monitoring, as well as security applications. One of the things that I did in my prior role at Maxar is we provided satellite imagery, that was used to support disaster response, and also to monitor illicit activities, things like illegal fishing, as well as legal logging and things of that nature. You can do that from space, which is very powerful. So anyway, so that's kind of the background context for the amount of investment that's gone into space. What that's resulted in is a proliferation of objects in space. And so in my new role at LEO Labs, what we do is we built a global network of ground-based radars that's tracking activity in low Earth orbit. And so today there's close to 20,000 objects in space in low Earth orbit. So that's from about 250 kilometers out to 2,500 kilometers in space. And what we're seeing is that there's a mix of active satellites, inactive satellites, rocket bodies, and space debris, and that's creating more risk to all that $305 billion of investment, because the more congestion there is, the more risk there is for collisions. And so what we do is we're monitoring that activity to identify where there's risks of a conjunction between one satellite and another object that then could result in more space debris, and damage, that asset and bring down that service, which then doesn't allow us to benefit from the communication networks, the remote sensing capabilities, et cetera. And so that's the kind of history. We were part of that private equity investment. So we've raised close to $130 million in venture capital to make these investments. But what's interesting in the context of this discussion is that in building out that global network, we've been very strategic and intentional about having broad geographic coverage, of our sensors. And so we're a U.S. company that was founded out of Silicon Valley, and so our initial radar deployments were in the U.S., so in Alaska and Texas, but then we were intentional about adding robust equatorial coverage as well as Southern Hemisphere coverage, through our investments. And in the Western Hemisphere, Costa Rica, as well as our investment in Argentina, was intentional to invest millions of dollars, in order to be able to provide a global persistent sensing capability. I think what we've seen is, in addition to the risks associated with safety, of those physical safety of those assets, as these services become more essential, there's also a need for the public-private partnership around sharing, threat intelligence and information. One thing we saw, particularly with the conflict in Ukraine, was that as communication networks and remote sensing, was highly valued, to support that mission, those allied and partner missions, that there was increased risk of cyber attacks, GPS jamming, other forms of disruptions, to satellite, based services. And so creating the right dynamic where both nations and industry could share information was very important. And so I think that, as we're thinking about, how we evolve in the industry and be a broader part of the community, it's really important to not just build out the capability, but also invest in ensuring that, the local communities where we operate are building out their acumen and competency, around the kind of the emerging market for space situational awareness and space domain awareness. And so we're aggressively partnering with local research institutions, enabling STEM education, also working to stimulate activity with local entrepreneurs so that they can not just benefit from the data to keep their assets safe, but also learn about how to apply it to continue to grow the space economy.
Thank you. Okay, and finally we have Dr. Patrick Antoine. He's currently the Chief Executive Officer and Technical Director of the CARICOM private sector organization, Secretariat, the most recent associate institution of the Caribbean community, CARICOM, which serves to mobilize private sector participation in the CARICOM institutionality. He also sits as a director on several regional boards and has lectured in the Master in International Trade Policy program of the University of the West Indies, Cave Hill campus between 2006 and 2019. And he has also survived several postgraduate students. Dr. Antoine has written extensively on a wide range of macroeconomic subjects, including on productivity, growth, and competitiveness, international trade policy, and economic integration, among other areas. He has authored several technical papers and studies in these areas. So the question would be, what are the various security challenges facing the Caribbean private sector that impact regional growth and development? How do interactions with US feature in these considerations?
Thank you very much for having me, and I bring you greetings on behalf of the Executive Committee and the private sector in the Caribbean. The CPSO, the organization that I serve, is in fact the newest institution in CARICOM, as you indicated. And we think it was brought into the service of a regional integration in CARICOM, and regional integration has two parts. The first part is what we do among the countries in the Caribbean, and the second part is what we do between the Caribbean and our major trading partners. And of course, the US is our major trading partner in CARICOM. You all understand the context of trade between CARICOM and the United States, I believe. You're talking about nearly $20 billion in exports from the US to the countries of CARICOM, and just short of $2 billion in our exports in the Caribbean to the United States. The importance of this for us, I think, is significant. The first threat for us is the threat of crime and violence. And because of crime and violence, our heads of government in CARICOM have triggered a fourth pillar in the integration process, and that pillar is a pillar dealing with regional security. And we're very happy about the collaboration that we've had with the United States. From the private sector's perspective, crime and violence is one of the key issues challenging Caribbean businesses at this time, to the extent that in the Crime and Violence Symposium held last year in Port of Spain, the private sector signaled that crime and violence was in fact an issue that had to be dealt with from a security standpoint, or else the goals of development and growth would not be achieved. And I want to be clear in saying, when you look at the statistics, it's very clear for us in the region that if we don't get a handle on crime and violence in the context of the Caribbean, and also in its interaction with the United States, the trade in weapons, for instance, guns in particular, it is in fact going to damage both our own growth and development, but also you are very clear on the knock-on implications to the United States. I think the second one, because we've dealt with crime and violence a lot this morning, is this issue of food security and nutrition security. And I wouldn't want to leave here without saying that for us, this is as important a threat to our interaction between the region and the United States as is crime and violence. They're intertwined. As we speak, we need to recognize that Haiti is part of CARICOM. Haiti being part of CARICOM forces us this morning to recognize that food and nutrition insecurity in Haiti is one of the travesties of this time. We're talking in Haiti about nearly 5 million persons who are food and nutrition insecure. And the UNICEF told us last year that there were about just over 100,000 children that were facing starvation. For us, this issue of food and security raises a tremendous scope for collaboration, as with crime and violence. From the perspective that we're talking about, nearly 60% of our food is imported from the United States. But importantly, a large part of our diaspora live in the United States. In fact, there are some countries in the Caribbean where the population, the diaspora, outweighs the population at home by significant amounts. Again, we can talk about how we actually effect that, but what we're talking about is partnerships that need to be triggered between the private sector to make this happen. I think the third threat really is the threat that comes from the natural disasters and climate change. And that, of course, is a key one, because we know from the IMF and the United Nations organizations that if we're not able to address this issue of climate insecurity, it will impact our ecological systems, and it could lead to a collapse in several of the systems that trigger economic growth in the Caribbean. We're talking about the marine life, we're talking about agriculture, and those are particularly important. So the issue of how we deal with that, I think, is important, which is why we're happy about the fact that the United States has worked with the regional heads in triggering the PAC 2030, which of course has opened an opportunity for programs which are new, which are now taking climate change and agriculture and other interactions into account. I think for us, the fourth trigger in terms of the security spectrum would be the cyber. And there are far more attacks happening on the private sector than they care to announce, for obvious reasons. We're concerned about the lagging legislation. We're concerned about the lack of investment. And we think that opens opportunities that are immense for cooperation between the United States and CARICOM. So again, that's key. That's both the risk and the opportunity. I think next for us would be the threat that comes from the illicit trade and trafficking in goods and services and persons. We think too, the response here really has to be technology and more information sharing amongst the partners. And I think this is a significant risk to our growth and development. In fact, recently I had to take a colleague from the United States to show him just outside Port of Spain, not far, and their colleagues here who know the geography of the Southern Caribbean, that you are looking at Venezuela across the water, to give him a sense of the kinds of sort of risk that the Caribbean faces at this time. I think if I were to point to another one, because there are several, it would be the risk that comes from money laundering and the financial crimes that take place. Now all of these risks have a particularly damaging effect on the poor. And of course, they lead to more income insecurity. And we know from the work that we've done in the CPS, so the quantitative work, that income insecurity and poverty drives a lot of the tendencies that are damaging in all of the various respects. So if I were to conclude in one statement, it would be that all of these are intertwined. Every single one of them are intertwined. They have knock-on effects from the climate insecurity to poverty, to income insecurity, to food insecurity. And I think we have to deal with all of these, I think, in tandem. I just wanted to say that. We can come to the other things later.
Thank you, Dr. Antoine. And well, Nick, you were speaking about the PPPs before, and I would like to ask you if you want to add some more information, some specific information about them, and which are the most suitable models for America Latina.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I spoke about these PPPs at a very high level. For the sake of time, I think I'm going to talk about just one model that's in existence in the Western Hemisphere and Canada. I think we have some Canadian colleagues here. So, but the model that's going to depend on the jurisdiction is really depends on the unique nuances that each country has, right? The unique threats, the legal framework. So it's really up to the country and their stakeholders to depend what model is going to work best for them. But I will cite one specific example. It's a real world example again, and one that's focused on combating the illegal wildlife trade. So last year in Canada, Project Anton was launched, which is an initiative led by Scotiabank and supported by FinTrack, which is the Canadian Financial Intelligence Unit, along with an array of other partners, including the Royal Foundation's United for Wildlife Task Force, and again, other key domestic and international partners. The project is named after Anton Mzimba, who sadly was murdered for his brave commitment to protecting wildlife. And the goal of Project Anton is to improve the collective understanding of the illegal wildlife trade, and more specifically, to improve the detection of related money laundering. So in terms of outputs for this partnership, last year, the partnership directly supported FinTrack's publication of an operational alert to the financial sector in Canada. And it was meant to support reporting entities, such as banks, in recognizing financial transactions suspected of being related to the laundering of funds associated with the illegal wildlife trade. And we've talked about data here before. It's important to understand that financial institutions have an incredible amount of data, and they also have reporting obligations. So there's a legal obligation to share information that they see with government authorities to aid them in their investigations. So this specific operational alert provided money laundering indicators that came from FinTrack's analysis of suspicious activity reporting that was filed by financial institutions. But their work was also, considering this audience, was also supported by analysis of domestic and international sources. So this could be, for example, data-driven analysis that's produced by nonprofit organizations and think tanks. Financial institutions would then use these indicators to improve how they detect and report potential instances of financial crime. And they could do this either through their automated transaction monitoring systems or through various proactive analytic and investigative work that's underway. And so FinTrack actually just reported yesterday, they have another PPP. They do their PPPs by specific financial crime types. So they have another one that's focused on human trafficking. And so they reported that there was an 800% uptick in reporting on human trafficking after they did a similar alert, right? So that's information being held by the private sector, getting to law enforcement authorities. It's better information that's produced in a more timely fashion. And I think it's important to note that there's been a real growth in these types of partnerships around the world. There's about 25 or so that currently exists around the world now. That number grows each year. It's important to note that a number of intergovernmental organizations like the Financial Action Task Force, or FATF, GAFI as it's known in the region, which is now led by a Mexican former Treasury official, has recognized the immense value of these types of partnerships and cited them as a best practice. So just for the sake of time, I think I'll close by saying something that's already been said a few times by the different panelists, right? There's an incredible opportunity to harness data in a much more effective way. You can take the complementary strengths of the private sector, the public sector, including government agencies, including law enforcement, the unique knowledge that's held in civil society, and it could be related to environmental crimes, for example. So through these partnerships, they can really play a vital role in safeguarding economic and national security.
Thank you, Nick. Thank you. Maria, one more question. What are the key risks and concerns private sector companies are evaluating when it comes to security concerns versus investing in the region?
I would say, right now, it's a challenging time, right? I mean, there's a challenging global economy, a lot of geopolitical risks. So companies, especially international companies, are under scrutiny when looking at investing. I think the number one, especially in the region, is just the political shifts. There was a time when political parties kind of stay to one side, but as there have been a lot of shifts over the last 5 years, when you change from one political party to another, there is a lot of challenges in regulatory uncertainty. And so we're seeing our members really in corporate spending almost 80% of their time really going in and speaking with governments and educating them when they're looking to go from one side of the policy to another, because obviously it makes huge changes. One interesting thing, thinking of FEMSA, who's obviously one of the largest global companies today, even those came out of Mexico, we're seeing a really interesting dynamic where you have these powerhouses now in Latin America, these multilatinas that have very strong local knowledge, working closer together with the international investors, where they come in and when there is new government, really working together to kind of talk to government and educate them on possible policy changes that might impact the business community. So there's, again, really seeing that interesting collaboration, private to private sector, but even international companies. So again, these very large global players that might be from Mexico or Chile or Argentina that really have a footprint and understanding of how the local government officials and what the new party might be looking at. So really looking at those changes affects tremendously, right, industries. I think the second one is investment risk. Obviously, again, because there's so much pressure on these international companies to really make the right choices. And I think the third one would be business operations and continuity, right? If we see riots, if you see these different challenges going on locally, then it just becomes challenging. I just saw not long ago, you know, some of the work that Southcom is doing in the region is extraordinary. When you talk about kind of public-private partnerships, what's interesting today is before it might be a company and a government, but today you're seeing Southcom and other organizations working government together with NGOs, together with academia, together with both multinational and multilatina companies, and I think there's one I'm forgetting, but you're seeing kind of all these sectors coming together to address specific issues. And when it comes to looking at the international investment in Latin America specifically, there's always the China versus US, and there was an interesting argument last week that they talked about that I think somebody here mentioned is something that I think we're not doing as the US and we should be doing is simply talking about the investments and the success of the investments. And many times there's China's in the news, but we should be better, US companies branding just the work that we're doing in Latin America that, you know, that would go a long way as well, so.
Thank you, Maria. Well, Oscar, you were speaking about the best practices that each company can share with the other companies and with other companies in other countries. What can you add about that?
Well, I think that once there's an acceptance of the need to engage, that you cannot fall back into this idea that, you know, you pay your taxes and then it's somebody else's problem. That is simply, that doesn't work. And particularly in regions that have so many issues of institutional development still unanswered. One of the best practices that I think we have also come to believe, it simply grew from experience, is that our company has a very strong presence in the small retail market, convenience stores. Aside from other regions, in Mexico, we have 22,000 convenience stores, OXXO. And just that footprint around the country gives us sort of like a level of visibility of what is happening all over. That is, thinking back of my days, in government, in Mexican government, I think I would be envious just to have a peek into that kind of like, 22,000 thermometers out there that can consistently retrieve information and have a feel for what is going on. In that regard, participating with the local police forces, we have a football championship that we organize with the police departments. And it's simply a very simple way to engage, to make them feel that they are recognized in what they do. Sometimes it's a very dangerous job in certain parts of the country. and just having those activities make them normal. Obviously, having been in public service for a good stretch of my working life gives me a sensitivity towards how things can be, how they can relate between private companies and authorities. And in that sense, I believe that building sort of like a common idea of the challenge that we all have, that we all face, even if it's from different points of view, has an enormous potential. If you add in other players, for instance, we have a very active conversation with the U.S. consulate in Monterrey, and there's OSAC, and there's so many other sort of like points of contact. I might add that I'm also part of a very interesting organization, which is security managers for large companies around the world, ISMA. And that organization has really opened my eyes about the variety of challenges that exist all around the world, and how there can be a sort of like a common thread of building a best practices portfolio, if you'd like. So yes, I think we need to bring all of these worlds together. Also, obviously, academia. Maybe, I don't know if it happens in other places in Latin America, but in Mexico, I have the sense that there is not enough engagement from academia with regards to law enforcement and to security concerns, because they're simply a little bit too operational, and there are few touch points between those worlds. But if there are, we need to build them. We need to build those bridges in a very deliberate fashion. So a lot of work to do.
Thank you, Oscar. And well, Tony, you were speaking about the challenges in the aerospace area. Do you want to add something more about what your company develops and the opportunities in Latin America?
Yeah, sure. I think that what I would say, tying it to some of the earlier discussions, what John Richardson said earlier about how Team USA needs to show up in region, I think that really resonated with me. And so just to kind of double tap on some comments I made earlier, there's been $305 billion of private investment in commercial space over the last decade. And of that, about $148 billion of that capital has been with US companies, of which Leo Labs is one. About $81 billion has been from Chinese investments. And so, as we think about how we then deploy that capital, being intentional about where we invest, both in capability and location, is really important. And so, the having a presence, like I mentioned, in Costa Rica and Argentina, is really strategic, because that allows us to both provide a more complete service. One of our customers that we're working with is the U.S. Department of Commerce, which is establishing a space traffic management system to provide both civilian agencies and commercial operators with early warning of threats to their spacecraft, and having sensors that are distributed around the world allow us to get more of an early warning on an upcoming threat. We want those services to be available not today, not tomorrow, but for the next couple of decades. And so in order to do that, we need to have an enduring relationship in every country where we operate, and we need to have strong economic, a vibrant community where we can help grow it over time. And so I think that's one of the areas that we're really committed to, is that we're kind of in it for the long term, and as a result, I think creating a environment where we're continue to stimulate the local economy is a very important strategic initiative.
Thank you, Tony. Well, we are running out of time, and I have a last question for Mr. Antoine. I don't know if the public has any question, you would tell me. But before that, we are going to be with Dr. Antoine. How has the CARICOM private sector thought to position itself to respond to and prepare for the diverse security challenges facing the US and CARICOM, which impact their economic and national security?
Yes, well, having regard to the time that we have, I want to leave perhaps the nugget behind is that the heads of government gave CARICOM's private sector an opportunity to configure themselves into one single institution so that businesses in the United States and the private sector can speak through one institution in CARICOM rather than 15 or 30 in addressing the opportunities that the panel have identified in its various dimensions, cyber, financial crimes, and so on. So the CARICOM private sector organization went the extra step, and we formed ourselves into a CARICOM private sector organization, US Business Council. There was a gap before. Years ago, we had institutions that filled that gap. Those institutions, for one reason or another, have disappeared. The second important thing is that we believe we have all the resources in the hemisphere if we were to arrange ourselves properly and collaborate to address the challenges in the hemisphere. And the private sector is leading the way. The CPSO Business Council is financed by the membership. It does not depend on financing from the government. And we think that's an important signal. Clearly, in supporting the programs, we're prepared to do that. Thirdly, the CARICOM private sector organization took to the governments at their invitation a strategy called 25 by 25, which is to reduce the agricultural imports by 25% by 2025. And this came out of the horrible experiences of COVID, where we had supply chain difficulties, and there were lots of periods of real deep uncertainty by countries that are largely net food importing countries. This gives us an opportunity through the CPSO US Business Council that I've announced to work with businesses in the United States in creating the partnerships required to make our regions, both CARICOM and the United States, more resilient. Because we are talking about countries like Guyana with its tremendous land resource, Suriname, Jamaica, Belize with just an enormous capacity that remains untapped, not to mention the smaller countries that are ideally suited for the value-added products that have now been performing well under the Caribbean Basin Initiative. The other thing I want to say is that the way that we have worked in agriculture is that there's an opportunity for us to work in that same way with the industrial products. We refer to the industrial products as all of the products outside of agriculture. And we think in the way that the US has announced how it intends to proceed in terms of its chips without getting into your domestic politics, we believe that the Caribbean is ideally suited through nearshoring to fill a number of these gaps so that rather than having our young, bright minds always perceive opportunities to migrate as living and working here, through nearshoring and friendshoring, countries like Jamaica and others are showing the way. And if we were to develop the partnerships and the financial instruments, and we can do that, then we believe that we can do it. So let me wrap up quickly by saying that partnerships, developing financial instruments, the information infrastructure, transportation, where the heads have given us a mandate as a CPSO to come with solutions to them that they're prepared to endorse and to put the incentive framework in place. We're inviting the private sector in the United States to partner with us in this respect as well. So that's our response. It's proactive, it's based on implementation, and it's based on us performing, not just speaking the speak, but walking the walk. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And we have a question here.
Hi, my name is Monica, and thank you to all the speakers for providing such valuable insights. Maria, there's something that you mentioned in regards to emerging technologies, particularly artificial intelligence, and you touched on the risks that artificial intelligence poses, but I'm wondering from a private sector perspective if you see any benefits in the uses of artificial intelligence. And I do want to get insights from other panelists as well, in case there's perspectives you can provide in terms of uses that the private sector can do to mitigate threats. Thank you.
Well, it's funny because on my team, I'm the most untechy of all, but I will speak for our tech companies. Absolutely. What we see from working, and we work with all the large ones, AWS, Google, Microsoft, et cetera, is really the advancement. I mean, they're really looking at implementing AI to increase, for example, the customer experience, to really make, for example, many times when you look at the F1, a lot of sports, the things that we take for granted, a lot of the reason we have a better and easier experience and a more interesting experience as consumers is AI is behind that. So it's understanding data and being able to analyze. And one of the things that the private sector is working very strongly on is that it's not that AI is going to take human jobs, but it's going to really, how can we reskill, obviously, the employees so that they can actually learn how to use AI and really be more productive. So there is, I think, definitely both sides of the coin, right? It's understanding. We hear from a lot of CEOs, they're all trying to understand, how do we utilize AI? How do we obviously then manage AI ethically? So I think both sides, there's a lot of talk about that going on right now.
And if I could add quickly and just on that question, so huge believers in the use of innovative technologies, artificial intelligence, machine learning, and we announced a partnership last year with Google to work with them in partnership to leverage cloud computing capabilities, their AI machine learning expertise, to launch a platform that helps us find more financial crime faster, right? So it's helping us uncover suspicious activity that you can't see with the naked eye, right? And that is ultimately helping us to mitigate financial crime risk. We get better information to law enforcement more quickly, and we also reduce customer friction because we have less false positives to work through in our automated monitoring systems. So tremendous upside, and it's inevitable that we're going to increasingly rely on and leverage AI.
Perfect. We have one last question.
Hi, my name is Lara Briceño. I'm a senior in the university and studying political science and international economy. I want to ask you all about a topic that has decreased the attention from public eye, but it remains present, and you talked about it a little bit. So China continues to carry out its development projects through the Belt and Road Initiative. One of the issues should be cause for concern, for example, when it comes to the issue of money laundering, is the fact that when the websites of these infrastructure projects, you go dive into and see what their funding and their data about the project goes about, the links lead to nowhere or display error messages in the technology. So that, let's say you're looking up at ports that was built, you're looking at all the infrastructure, the details, the funding that you look into it, it leads nowhere. It says the page doesn't exist, and so on and so forth. My question is, based on your different perspectives, how does this project get discussed in your fields, and what are the implications for security as well as foreign investment that it comes with, not only in the Latin American region, but in the rest of the world?
So one of the things that I saw in my prior role at Maxar is that you can leverage satellite imagery, as a way to monitor, different investment, areas. And so we looked at things like the build out of road networks and, buildings and other, types of critical infrastructure. And so I know there are a few partnerships we did with academic institutions that were able to take open source intelligence and then combine that with satellite-based intelligence, to be able to understand the progress of those types of investments.
I just want to make one comment on this before I leave, because I think it's so important for me to leave this perspective, I think, in the room. The United States and the Caribbean have a relationship that has dated back for several centuries. The relationship is both at a financial level, at the level of people, culture. You have a relationship at the level of trade, goods and services. There's a lot of discussions about the concern with China. I think there are three things that I want to leave with you. One is that I think we need to invest more in understanding the heterogeneity of the Caribbean countries. They're not all the same. That's the first point. I think we look at them all from a sort of homogeneous lens. The second thing is that the Caribbean countries, having gone through a period of heavy borrowing and then high debt are no longer in a position where they can sustain a lot of debt. And there's an opportunity, therefore, given the private sector relationship and the cultural relationships that exist between us, for us to seize the moment in creating instruments and policies that allows the CARICOM and the US private sector to work more closely in all the areas we mentioned. In short, I'm not seeing this era as being an area that's necessarily fraught with more risk than opportunity if we act. But we must act. How must we act? If the issue is state-led Chinese investments finding their way in CARICOM, then we must look at the policy environment that prevents US firms from investing in CARICOM more easily. And I'm talking about public procurement legislation. I'm talking about the types of incentives that we need to put in place. I'm talking about the financial products like the ones you've mentioned in terms of venture capital that will enable the opportunities. We have to act. But I want to say that when we look at it from the private sector perspective, what we see is a lot more opportunities to act than we are concerned about the risk of China if we act. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you to all the panelists. Thank you. We have spoken about technology, artificial intelligence, aerospatial technology, and most of all about the private sector commitment to work together with the social civil society and the government. So thank you very much. It was very interesting to hear you. And well, we go on with the conference. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.